I can find your daughter, but you must agree to one condition, said the street kid. Richard Thompson had been pacing in circles around the central square of Portland for nearly 2 hours, his phone glued to his ear as he spoke to people who might have seen his daughter. 3 days had passed since Emily disappeared, and every minute felt like an eternity of agony for the widowed businessman. That's when he felt a light tap on his arm. Turning around, he saw a skinny boy who couldn't have been more than 14, wearing dirty clothes and messy hair. "You're Emily's dad, right?" the boy asked, his sharp eyes contrasting with his fragile appearance. Richard stopped mid-call, hanging up automatically. How did this boy know his daughter's name? "Who are you? How do you know about her?" Richard questioned, a mix of hope and suspicion rising in his chest. "My name's Tyler. I've lived around these streets for about 3 years. And I can find your daughter, but you have to agree to one condition." The boy spoke with a seriousness that didn't match his age. Richard's heart raced. Finally, someone who might have information about Emily. "What condition? Money? Name your price." Richard was already pulling out his wallet. Tyler shook his head. "Not money. The condition's different. You'll have to spend a whole day living like we do out here. Like a beggar." Richard stopped breathing for a second. This had to be some cruel joke. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. 24 hours living like I do, begging for food, sleeping wherever you can, being treated the way we're treated. Only after that will I take you to her." Richard looked around the square. A few passers-by walked past, glancing at the dirty boy with disdain. He'd never noticed it before, but now he saw how people avoided looking directly at Tyler. "Why this crazy condition? I just want my daughter back." "Because your daughter asked me to. She said if you ever came looking for her, I should only tell you where she was if you understood a few things first. Is she okay? Is she hurt?" Richard's voice trembled. "She's alive, but she's not okay. She's hurting. Really hurting." Richard closed his eyes, guilt weighing on him. In the weeks before her disappearance, he and Emily had argued constantly, mostly about her boyfriend, Marcus, a humble young man Richard openly despised. "All right, I accept your condition," Richard said, surprising himself. Tyler smiled for the first time, revealing crooked but genuine teeth. "Then let's get started. First thing, you need to take off those rich clothes and put on something that fits your new reality." Tyler led Richard to a narrow alley behind the square, where a pile of old clothes sat in plastic bags. "These are from people who don't need them anymore. Pick something." Richard hesitated. His clothes cost more than many families' monthly income. The Italian dress pants, the linen shirt, the Swiss watch, they all represented who he was, or at least who he thought he was. With trembling hands, he began changing. He put on faded, torn jeans, a yellowed t-shirt with holes, and worn-out sneakers that barely stayed on his feet. Tyler watched closely. "Now your watch and wallet." "What?" "Beggars don't walk around with an Omega and an Italian leather wallet. Leave everything here. I'll keep it safe. You'll get it back once you've met the condition." Richard reluctantly removed his watch. It was a gift from Emily last Father's Day. He handed over his wallet too, keeping only a few coins in his pocket. "There, now you're one of us," Tyler said, examining the transformation. Richard caught his reflection in a nearby store window and startled. The reflected image showed a completely different man. Without the status symbols, he looked just like one of the many homeless people he had always ignored. "First lesson starts now. You're going to ask for food at that bakery over there," Tyler said, pointing to a busy shop. "Me? Ask for food? That's how we survive. Go on, ask for some bread. Anything." Richard walked slowly toward the bakery. With every step, he felt the weight of people's stares. When he reached the counter, the clerk didn't even look up. "Excuse me," Richard began, but his voice came out too quiet. "Spit it out. I don't have all day," the woman said impatiently. "I was wondering if you had any bread to spare. Anything." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, back to the story. The clerk finally looked at him, and Richard saw something in her eyes he had never seen directed at himself before, disgust mixed with irritation. "Get out of here. This isn't a soup kitchen," she said loudly, making other customers turn and stare. Richard's face burned with shame. He had never felt so humiliated in his life. He stumbled out of the bakery as if he'd been punched in the gut. Tyler was leaning against the wall outside, watching everything. "So, how'd it go?" "Horrible," Richard whispered. "Welcome to our world. Emily went through this too." "What do you mean?" "Emily never had to beg for food." "No, but she saw others going through it, and she saw how you reacted when people asked for food outside your company." Richard remembered. How many times had he walked past the homeless outside his office without even looking? How many times had he complained to security to clear the sidewalk? "Let's go to the next place," Tyler said, starting to walk. They walked several blocks until they reached a small central square where a few people sat on benches, most of them looking down on their luck. Tyler approached a group eating sandwiches. "Hey everyone, this is Richard. He's staying with us today." An older black woman with graying hair looked at Richard curiously. Her eyes were kind but tired. "First time on the streets, son?" she asked. Richard didn't know how to answer. Technically, it was a lie to say he was homeless, but at that moment it was his reality. "Yeah, sort of. I'm Miss Dorothy. Been here about 2 years, ever since my son kicked me out." She said it without bitterness, just stating a fact. "Why would he do that?" "Oh, he married some high-maintenance girl. She didn't want a poor mother-in-law living with them, said I made a bad impression on her friends." Richard's chest tightened. How many times had he judged people without knowing their stories? "But don't be sad, dear, we always find a way. Look here." Miss Dorothy pulled out a wrapped sandwich from a bag. "Got an extra one. You want it?" Richard looked at the simple bologna sandwich and wanted to refuse. He used to eat at expensive restaurants with gourmet dishes. But his stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since morning. "Thank you," he said, taking the sandwich. The first bite was strange. The bread was a little stale and the bologna was cheap, but Richard realized he was hungrier than he thought. "Good, huh?" Miss Dorothy smiled. "You learn to appreciate what you've got." As they ate, more homeless people arrived at the square. Richard watched how they treated each other. There was a solidarity here he had never seen in his corporate world. "Tyler, where's that pretty girl who always came around here?" asked a middle-aged man with scruffy facial hair. "What girl, Mr. Johnson?" "That dark-haired girl with green eyes. She always brought snacks for everyone and would chat with us. It's been a few days since she last showed up." Richard swallowed hard. Emily had green eyes and dark brown hair. "Do you know my daughter?" he asked before Tyler could respond. "Your daughter?" Mr. Johnson looked surprised. "You're Emily's father? You know her?" "Of course, sweetest girl I've ever met. Always polite, always worried about us. But it's been a few days since she came around." Miss Dorothy held Richard's arm. "Son, that girl cried a lot when she came here. Said her father didn't understand her, that he only cared about money and appearances." Richard felt his eyes well up. Every argument he'd had with Emily over the last few months rushed back to him, especially that terrible fight about Marcus, when he'd said he didn't want some slum kid as a son-in-law. "Did she talk about me?" "She did. Said she loved her father very much, but couldn't stand being treated like a trophy anymore. That you only cared about what others thought of her." Tyler watched the conversation in silence, but Richard noticed a different gleam in the boy's eyes. "Let's keep moving," Tyler said. "We've still got a long way to go." They said goodbye to the group in the central square and walked through the streets of Portland. Richard noticed how different the city looked from street level without the protection of imported cars and expensive clothes. "Where are we going?" "To the bus terminal. There's a church nearby that serves soup at 6. We need to get there early to secure a spot in line." As they walked, Richard noticed things he'd never seen before. How people averted their eyes when they spotted the homeless, how some clutched their bags tighter, how others crossed the street to avoid contact. "Tyler, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me?" Tyler stopped walking and looked Richard straight in the eyes. Because Emily helped me when I needed it most, and she made me promise her something. What? That if you ever came looking for her, I'd try to make you understand how she felt. What it was like to be looked down on just for not having money. Richard remembered all the times he'd spoken badly about Marcus in front of Emily, how he'd said he didn't want that kind of person in the family, how he'd threatened to cut off her allowance if she kept dating that slum kid. Did she tell you about Marcus? She did. And I know Marcus. He's a good guy. Been working since he was 12 to help his mom and younger siblings. You know him? Yeah, I do. And you're going to meet him too. He works at the church where we're having dinner. Richard's stomach turned. Meeting Emily's boyfriend like this would be humiliating. But maybe it was exactly what he needed. They reached the bus terminal as the sun was setting. The place was busy, people coming and going, but Richard noticed several homeless folks there too, some sleeping in dark corners, others trying to scrape together money. Is this where she stays? Richard asked. Sometimes. She knows all the safe spots in the city now. They walked to a small church near the terminal. A line had already formed outside, about 30 people waiting. Let's get to the back of the line, Tyler said. As they waited, Richard studied the people around him. Whole families, elderly folks alone, young people who could have been Emily's age. Each had a story, a life somehow interrupted. A woman ahead of them cradled a crying baby, trying to soothe it with a soft lullaby. Does she have milk? Richard asked Tyler. Probably not. A lot of moms here go hungry so their kids can have what little they get. Richard felt an urgent need to help, but realized he had nothing to offer. For the first time in his life, he was in the same situation as those people, relying on the kindness of others. The church doors opened, and the line began moving slowly. Richard saw volunteers setting up tables and preparing food. And then he saw Marcus. The 17-year-old boy was helping serve soup, wearing a simple apron and offering a kind smile to each person who passed by. When Marcus spotted Tyler in line, he waved excitedly. Tyler, good to see you, man. Where's Emily? It's been days since she's shown up. Tyler glanced meaningfully at Richard. Marcus, I want you to meet someone. This is Richard. Marcus looked at Richard without recognition. Richard realized that without his expensive clothes and status symbols, he was just another face in the crowd. Nice to meet you, Richard. Are you new here? Marcus asked with genuine concern. Richard didn't know how to answer. Technically, he was new to this situation, but not in the way Marcus imagined. Yeah, first day, he managed to say. Man, you look nervous. Don't worry, everyone here is good people, and the food's great. Mrs. Williams makes the best soup in town. Richard watched how Marcus treated each person in line with respect and warmth. There wasn't a trace of superiority or forced pity, just genuine care for others' well-being. When it was Richard's turn, Marcus served his portion with the same gentle smile. Hope you like it. If you want seconds, just say the word. Richard held his bowl of soup and went to sit at one of the communal tables. The soup was delicious, made with care and simple ingredients. Beside him, an elderly man ate slowly, savoring every spoonful. First time here? The man asked. Yeah. You'll see there's no better place in the city. It's not just the food, it's how they treat us. Like we're real people, you know. Richard watched Marcus working. The young man had finished serving and was now sitting at a table with some of the older shelter residents, chatting and laughing with them. That boy there is special, the elderly man continued, pointing to Marcus. Works 2 jobs, studies at night, and still finds time to help here 3 times a week. You know him well, known him since he was a kid. His mom raised all 4 children alone after their father left the family. That boy never caused trouble for anyone, always helping everyone instead. Richard felt the weight of guilt grow in his chest. All the terrible things he'd said about Marcus, all the prejudices he'd held. Is he dating a girl named Emily? Richard asked, feigning casual curiosity. Yeah, he is. Lovely, well-mannered girl. They're really into each other. But I heard her father doesn't approve of the relationship. Must be a very proud man not to see the kind of person Marcus is. Every word felt like a dagger in Richard's heart. He was beginning to understand the extent of the damage he'd caused. Dear listener, If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. After dinner, Tyler and Richard walked back to the bus terminal. The night was cold, and Richard didn't have a jacket. For the first time in years, he felt real cold, not the chill of an air-conditioned room, but the damp, biting cold of the streets. "Where are we going to sleep?" Richard asked. "Right here at the terminal. There are some benches in the back that are okay. Security doesn't bother us much as long as we don't make trouble. They found a spot near the terminal restrooms." Tyler pulled out some cardboard from a bag hidden behind a trash can. "This'll work as a mattress. It's not the Ritz-Carlton, but it's better than the cold ground." Richard lay down on the hard cardboard and stared at the bus terminal ceiling. The noise of buses arriving and departing was constant, mixed with passengers' chatter and loudspeaker announcements. "Tyler, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "How did you end up on the streets?" Tyler stayed silent for a moment, looking at the ceiling. "My parents were addicts. Crack. When I was 11, they sold me to a guy who said he'd give me work. I managed to escape, but I had nowhere to go. The neighbors didn't want to get involved, and I didn't know any family." Richard felt a lump in his throat. "And you've survived like this for 3 years? You learn. There's a network of people who help each other. Miss Dorothy taught me where to get food. Mr. Johnson showed me safe places to sleep. And there's Marcus too, always willing to help. How did you meet Emily?" "She showed up here about 2 months ago, crying her eyes out, sitting alone on that bench over there. I asked if she needed help, and she started talking about her problems at home." Richard turned to face Tyler. "What kind of problems?" "She said her dad only cared about what others thought of the family, that she couldn't date who she wanted, couldn't have the friends she wanted, couldn't even choose the clothes she wanted to wear." Richard remembered all the strict rules he had imposed on Emily, the expensive school she attended, the designer clothes he forced her to wear, the social events where she had to appear as the perfect daughter. "Did she talk about her mother?" "A lot. Said her mum was different from her dad, that she understood her, supported her dreams. She really misses her." Richard closed his eyes. Rebecca had passed away 2 years ago, a victim of cancer. Emily was 14 at the time and was devastated. Richard, in his grief, had shut down even more and buried himself in work, leaving Emily to deal with the loss alone. "Tyler, do you think I'm a bad father?" "I don't know. I never had a real dad to compare. But Emily loves you a lot. She just wanted you to love her for who she is, not who you want her to be." Richard tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't stop racing. Every conversation he'd had with Emily in the last few months played in his head like a movie. He began to notice a pattern he'd never seen before. He always talked about how things would affect the family's image, never about how they'd affect Emily. In the early hours, Richard was woken by loud voices. 2 men were arguing nearby, clearly drunk. "Hey, you two, get out of here!" one of them shouted. Richard startled awake, but Tyler stayed calm. "We're not bothering anyone, man, just sleeping." "I don't care. You're making the place look bad. My girlfriend's coming back from a trip soon, and I don't want her seeing people like you here." Richard felt anger rising. Those men were talking exactly the way he used to talk about the homeless. "Listen here, pal." Richard started to get up, but Tyler grabbed his arm. "Let it go, not worth fighting. Let's move somewhere else." They gathered their cardboard and walked to another corner of the terminal. Richard was furious. "Why didn't you stand up to them? They had no right to treat us like that. And you think that would have fixed anything? They'd call security and we'd get kicked out of the whole terminal. Better to pick your battles." Richard realized the wisdom in Tyler's words. At 14, the boy had already learned lessons about dignity and survival that Richard at 42 had never needed to learn. They managed to sleep a few hours before dawn. Richard woke up with his whole body aching. The cardboard didn't provide enough protection against the hard ground, and his back ached from the restless night. "How did you put up with this for 3 years?" Richard asked, stretching. "You get used to it. Your body adapts. And there are worse nights than this." They folded the cardboard and hid it behind the trash can again. Tyler explained it was important to leave the place clean so they could come back other nights. "And now?" Richard asked. Now we'll get coffee. There's a bakery up ahead that sometimes gives out leftover bread from the day before. They walked to the bakery, the same one where Richard had been humiliated the day before. This time it was Tyler who approached the counter. "Good morning, Ms. Baker. Do you have anything left from yesterday?" The woman behind the counter smiled at Tyler. "Hi, sweetheart. Yes, I do. Hold on, I'll get it for you." She returned with a bag of French rolls and 2 cups of coffee with milk. "Thank you, Ms. Baker. You're an angel." "Oh, don't mention it, dear. You boys need to eat." Richard noticed the difference in treatment. The same woman who had looked at him with disdain the day before treated Tyler with motherly affection. "Why does she treat you differently?" Richard asked once they left the bakery. "Because she knows me. I've been coming here for 2 years. At first she was cold too, but over time she saw I never caused trouble, never made a mess. We earned her trust." They sat on the curb to drink their coffee and eat the bread. Richard watched the morning bustle of the city, well-dressed people rushing to work, luxury cars in traffic, executives talking on their phones. 24 hours ago, he had been part of that world. Now sitting on the curb in dirty clothes, he was just part of the urban scenery those people ignored. "Tyler, you said you know where Emily is. When can I see her?" "Tonight. But first, there are a few more things you need to understand, and there's a second part to the condition." "Second part?" "Yeah. The first part was you living like we do. The second part is you talking to Marcus, honestly, no lies." Richard's stomach twisted. "Talk about what?" "About Emily. About what you think of him. About why you don't accept their relationship." "But he doesn't know who I am." "He will when you tell him." The idea of exposing himself to Marcus, admitting his prejudices and mistakes, terrified Richard. But if this was what it took to get Emily back, all right, when? Now he works at the corner store in the mornings before school. They finished their coffee and walked to the small market. Marcus was stocking shelves, focused on his work. "Marcus," Tyler called. The young man turned and smiled when he saw Tyler. "Hey man, how was the night?" "Quiet." "Marcus, can you take a break? I need to talk to you about something important." Marcus glanced at his boss, who nodded. "Sure, let's step outside." The three left the store and sat on a bench in the square across the street. "Marcus," Tyler began, "Richard here has something to tell you." Marcus looked at Richard curiously. "What's up, man?" Richard took a deep breath. His hands were shaking. "Marcus, I'm Emily's father." Marcus's expression changed completely. The friendly look turned to shock, then anger. "You're what?" "I'm Richard Thompson, Emily's father." Marcus stood abruptly. "Are you kidding me? You're the guy who forbade Emily from seeing me, who said I wasn't good enough because I'm poor." Richard nodded, unable to meet the young man's eyes. "Why are you dressed like this? Why are you pretending to be homeless?" Tyler stepped in. "He's not pretending. He agreed to spend a day living like we do so he could see Emily." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. "I can't believe this. I can't believe you had the nerve to come here and put on this show." "It's not a show," Richard said, finally looking at Marcus. "I was desperate to find my daughter, and Tyler said he'd only take me to her if I met this condition." "And you think spending a day on the streets will change anything? That it'll erase all the prejudices you have against me?" Richard stood up too, feeling the need to meet Marcus at eye level. "I know it won't erase them, but maybe it'll help me understand some things." "Understand what?" "That poor people are human too. That we're not animals?" The anger in Marcus's voice was palpable, but Richard could hear the pain beneath it. "Marcus, I came here to apologize." "Apologize?" Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "You destroyed my relationship with the woman I love, made her ashamed of me, and now you want to say sorry. I know I was wrong. I know I was prejudiced and unfair to you. You have no idea how wrong you were. Emily cried after every conversation you two had about me. She felt torn between her love for you and her love for me." Richard felt tears welling up. "I didn't know I was hurting her like that." "You didn't know? Or you didn't want to know?" Marcus stepped closer. "Did you ever care to find out who I really am? Or did you just look at my cheap clothes and decide I wasn't good enough?" Richard stayed silent. The answer was obvious. and humiliating. I've been working since I was 12, Marcus continued. I wake up at 5 in the morning to deliver newspapers, come here to work at the market, help my mum take care of my younger siblings in the afternoon, and go to school at night. On weekends, I pick up shifts as a waiter at events. Richard watched the young man as he spoke. For the first time, he was truly seeing Marcus as a person, not as a threat to his social status. You know why I do all this? Marcus asked. To help your family? To help my family, yes, but also because I have dreams. I want to study business, have my own company one day. I want to give my mom and siblings a better life. Richard remembered his own dreams when he was young. He too had started with little, working hard to build his business. And Emily? How does she fit into your plans? Emily is the most special person I've ever met. She sees me for who I really am, not the way you see me. She believes in my dreams, supports me, makes me want to be a better person. Marcus's voice softened when he spoke of Emily. And I love her. Not because she's the daughter of a rich businessman, but for who she is. For her kindness, her intelligence, her huge heart. Richard realized he was hearing exactly the kind of words he'd want to hear from any suitor for his daughter. The problem was, they were coming from someone he'd judged based on social standing. Marcus, Richard said, his voice trembling, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for judging you without knowing you. I'm sorry for hurting Emily. And I'm sorry for being the kind of man who measures people's worth by the size of their bank account. Marcus studied Richard for a long moment. The anger in his eyes was fading, replaced by something closer to surprise. You're serious? Completely serious. These last few hours have shown me things about myself I didn't want to see. They've shown me I've become exactly the kind of person I despised when I was young. Tyler, who had been silently watching the whole conversation, finally spoke. Marcus, you can tell him about Emily now. Marcus sighed and sat back down on the bench. Emily is in a safe place. But she's not doing well. What do you mean she's not doing well? Richard felt panic rising again. She's very sad, very hurt. Not just with you, but with herself too. Why? Because she thinks she's being disloyal to you by loving me, because she can't choose between the two of you. Richard felt his heart break. Where is she? Marcus looked at Tyler, who nodded. She's at a youth shelter a few blocks from here, but she'll only agree to see you if she's sure you've really changed. How can I prove that to her? Marcus thought for a moment. There's one thing she always wanted you to do, but you always refused. What? She wanted you to meet my family, my mother, my siblings. She wanted you to see how we live, who we really are. Richard swallowed hard. The idea of visiting Marcus's family in their own home, likely in a rough neighborhood, had terrified him for months. All right, I'll do it. Marcus looked surprised. Really? Really? If that's what Emily wants, that's what I'll do. Tyler smiled. Then let's go. Marcus's mom lives nearby. They walked for about 15 minutes, leaving Portland's Central Square and entering a poorer part of town. The houses were modest, some still under construction, but Richard noticed the streets were clean and orderly. Here we are, Marcus said, stopping in front of a small two-story house painted light blue. They climbed a few steps and Marcus knocked on the door. Mom, it's me. A woman around 40 opened the door. She had the same gentle smile as Marcus, with tired but kind eyes. Marcus, I'm so glad you're here. I just made... She stopped when she saw Richard and Tyler. You brought guests? Mom, this is Tyler and Richard. Tyler, Richard, this is my mother, Mrs. Garcia. Nice to meet you, Richard said, unsure how to act. Oh, the pleasure is mine. Come in, come in. I just made a simple lunch, but there's enough for everyone. They stepped into the small house. Richard discreetly took everything in. The living room was cozy, with simple but well-kept furniture. Family photos hung on the walls, and a few trophies sat on a shelf. Are those trophies yours, Marcus? Richard asked. Yeah, soccer and some academic competitions from school. Mrs. Garcia served lunch at the small kitchen table, rice, beans, stewed chicken, and a lettuce salad. Simple food, but tasty and made with care. "And where do you work, Richard?" Mrs. Garcia asked. Richard glanced at Marcus, unsure if he should tell the truth. "You can say it," Marcus said. "My mom won't treat you differently just because you have money. I own a construction company." "How interesting." "Marcus always says he wants to go into business. Maybe one day you two could work together." Richard nearly choked on his food. The ease with which Mrs. Garcia spoke about a future where he and Marcus worked together was unsettling. "Mom," Marcus said, "Richard is Emily's father." Mrs. Garcia stopped eating and looked at Richard with an unreadable expression. "Emily's father? The Emily you're dating?" "Yeah." "That sweet girl you brought here a few times?" "The same one." Mrs. Garcia studied Richard for a long moment. "You're not how I imagined." "How did you imagine me?" "Well, from what Emily said, I thought you'd be different." Richard realized he was being judged by Mrs. Garcia, and it made him uneasy. "What did Emily say about me?" "That you were a good father but too worried about what others thought. That you loved her deeply but were afraid to show it." Richard felt his eyes well up again. "She said that?" "She did. That girl loves you so much, you know, even with all the problems between you." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot since we're just starting out. Now, continuing, after lunch, Mrs. Garcia showed Richard some photos of Marcus as a child and teenager. Richard saw a boy who was always smiling, even in the oldest pictures when the family was clearly struggling financially. "Marcus has always been like this," Mrs. Garcia explained. "Even when we had almost nothing, he was always willing to help others. How did you manage to overcome those hardships?" "With a lot of hard work and unity. When my husband abandoned us, I thought I wouldn't be able to raise the 4 children alone. But Marcus, even though he was the youngest of the boys, started working early to help out." Richard looked at Marcus with growing admiration. "How old were you when you started working?" 12. I began by selling candy at stoplights. See, then I got a job as a paper boy. That's actually how I met Tyler." "How so?" Tyler smiled. "I used to sleep in front of one of the houses where Marcus delivered newspapers. At first he was afraid of me, but after a while he started leaving a piece of bread for me along with the paper." "You did that?" Richard asked Marcus. "I did. My mom always said we should help those in a worse situation than ours." Richard thought about how many times he had walked past homeless people without even looking. The difference in values was striking. "And that's how you became friends?" "It was," Tyler said. "Marcus was the first person to treat me like a human being after I ended up on the streets. And when I met Emily and found out she was his girlfriend, I understood why they got along so well." "Why?" "Because they both have the same kind heart." Richard stayed at Marcus's house until late afternoon. He also met Marcus's younger brothers, 10-year-old twins who were clearly in awe of their older brother. "Marcus is going to be a lawyer," one of the twins told Richard. "A businessman," the other corrected. "He's going to have a company just like Emily's dad." Richard smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd had in a long time. "And you? What do you want to be when you grow up?" "I want to be a doctor," said the first twin. "And I want to be a teacher," said the second. Richard saw the same determination in the boy's eyes that he saw in Marcus. That family had something money couldn't buy: unity, love, and hope. When it was time to leave, Mrs. Garcia held Richard's hands. "Richard, can I give you some advice?" "Of course." "Emily needs to know that you accept her for who she is. She doesn't want to be your trophy. She wants to be your daughter. And Marcus, he's a good young man. If you give him a chance, you'll see there's no one better to take care of your girl." Richard nodded, too emotional to speak. "Shall we go pick up Emily now?" Tyler asked. "Let's go." They said goodbye to Marcus's family and walked back toward the city center. Richard felt like a completely different person from the one who had woken up that morning. "Tyler," he said, "I want to thank you." "For what?" "For showing me things I needed to see, for being patient with me, for keeping the promise you made to Emily." Tyler smiled. "Emily is special. She deserved someone to fight for her. They arrived at a small yellow building with a discreet sign, Hope Shelter, Support for Youth. Marcus spoke to the receptionist, explaining the situation. She's in room 12, the woman said. But not all of you can go up. Only the father. Richard took a deep breath and climbed the stairs. He knocked lightly on the door of room 12. Come in, a familiar voice said from inside. Richard opened the door and saw Emily sitting on the bed, a book in her hands. She was thinner with dark circles under her eyes, but she was still his girl. Dad? Emily got out of bed, uncertain. Seeing him in those clothes, looking like that, was surreal. Hi, honey, Richard said, his voice breaking. What are you doing here? Why are you dressed like that? Because I needed to understand some things and Tyler helped me understand. Emily looked at Richard with a mix of confusion and hope. What things? That I was wrong. About everything. About Marcus. About you. About what really matters in life. Emily stepped closer slowly. Dad, are you serious? Completely serious. I spent a day living like Tyler lives. I ate at the same table as homeless people, slept on the floor of the bus terminal, begged for food on the street. And I understood what you've been trying to tell me for so long. What? That people are worth who they are, not what they have. That Marcus is worth more than any of my business partner's sons. That you're right to love him. Emily began to cry. Dad, I was so afraid you'd never accept me for who I am. Richard hugged her tightly. Forgive me, my daughter. Forgive me for being such a proud and blind father. Forgive me for making you feel torn between me and the love of your life. Do you like Marcus now? More than like. I admire him. He's exactly the kind of man I'd want you to date. Hard-working, honest, someone who truly loves you. Emily cried even harder. I was so scared, Dad. Scared of choosing between you, scared of hurting you, scared of hurting him. You don't have to choose, honey. Not anymore. Marcus is part of our family now, if he wants to be. They went downstairs together to find Tyler and Marcus. When Emily saw Marcus, she ran to hug him. You did it, she whispered in his ear. We did it, he replied. Richard approached them. Marcus, I'd like to extend an official invitation to you. What invitation? To dinner at our house tomorrow, with your mother and siblings. I want you to see the house where Emily grew up, and I want to start getting to know you as part of our family. Marcus was moved. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Really? And Tyler, Richard turned to the boy. You're invited too. In fact, I'd like to talk to you about a few things. What things? About your future, about school, about a place to live, about opportunities. Tyler shook his head. I don't want charity. It's not charity, it's family. You saved my family, Tyler. Let me repay you somehow. Repay me how? Would you like to study, learn a trade? I would. I've always wanted to read better, do math properly. Then we'll find a way, but not as a handout, as an investment. You're smart, brave, and have a good heart. The world needs people like you. Tyler looked at Emily, who nodded encouragingly. Okay, but I want to work for it. Deal. They walked back home together. Richard on one side, Emily and Marcus holding hands in the middle, and Tyler on the other side. An unlikely but true family. Dad, Emily said along the way. Thank you. For what? For having the courage to change. For hearing what I was trying to say. For giving Marcus a chance. Thank you for not giving up on me. For sending Tyler to teach me the lessons I needed to learn. How did you know it was my idea? Richard smiled. A father always knows. In the months that followed, many things changed in Richard's life. He enrolled Tyler in a private school and helped him get a part-time job at his company. Marcus started visiting regularly, and Richard discovered he enjoyed long conversations with the young man about business and football. Richard's company began hiring more young people from underprivileged communities, offering real opportunities for growth. Richard discovered that those employees were the most dedicated and loyal he had ever had. Emily began smiling genuinely again. She started volunteering at the shelter where she had stayed, helping other young people in difficult situations. 6 months later, during a family dinner that included Mrs. Garcia, the twins, Tyler, Emily, and Marcus, Richard stood up to make a toast. "I want to thank you for teaching me what I had forgotten," he said, raising his glass. "That true wealth isn't in what we have, but in who we love and who loves us back." "And I want to thank you," Emily said, also standing, "for having the best father in the world. A father who had the courage to admit his mistakes and change. And I," Marcus added, "want to thank you for accepting me into a family I already loved before I even knew them." Tyler, always shy, raised his glass without saying a word, but his smile said it all. A year later, Richard was walking through the central square where it had all begun. He now visited that place regularly, talking to the homeless people he had met, offering opportunities when possible, but mostly offering respect and acknowledgement. He stopped at the bench where Tyler had sat that first day. There was now a small golden plaque there which he had requested, "Where pride met humility and love overcame prejudice." "Dad!" Emily called from a distance. She was running toward him, with Marcus and Tyler close behind. "What is it, sweetheart?" "We have news to share." Richard looked at the 3 young people he had learned to love as his own. "What news?" "Tyler got into college," Emily shouted, hugging her friend. Richard felt his eyes fill with tears again. Tyler had studied hard over the past year, attending night classes and taking prep courses. "And that's not all," Marcus said. "I got in too, for business administration. And I," Emily finished, "decided what I want to study. Psychology. I want to help families going through struggles like ours." Richard hugged all 3 at once. "You make me the proudest man in the world." "Dad," Emily said, "do you remember that day when Tyler showed up in the square? How could I forget? Did you ever imagine your life would change this much?" Richard looked around the square, seeing it with completely different eyes than he had a year ago. "No. I thought I was just looking for my lost daughter. I didn't realize I was the one who was lost." "And now?" Tyler asked. "Do you feel found?" Richard smiled, wrapping his arms around the 3 of them. "Now I know that being found isn't about knowing where you are. It's about knowing who you are and who you love." They walked together through the square, a family that had found each other in the unlikeliest way, but was now stronger than any bond of blood. In Richard's home, which was now always filled with laughter and lively conversation, there was a photo on the living room table. It was a picture of the 4 of them, Richard, Emily, Marcus, and Tyler, taken on the day Tyler graduated high school. On the back, Emily had written, "To the father who had the courage to lose himself to be found, to the love that overcame pride, to the family we chose to have." And every night before bed, Richard gave thanks for that day in the square, when a homeless boy appeared with a strange condition. A condition that hadn't just changed one day of his life, but his entire life. Because sometimes, Richard thought, you have to lose everything to discover what truly matters. And sometimes the greatest lessons come from the people you least expect. 2 years later, at the simple wedding of Emily and Marcus, held in the same square where it all began, Richard gave the father of the bride speech. "My daughter," he said, looking into Emily's green eyes, "you taught me that love doesn't ask for permission. It simply happens. And when it happens with the right people, as it did with you and Marcus, our only choice is to accept and celebrate." He turned to Marcus. "Marcus, when I first met you, all I saw were your simple clothes and humble background. Today I see a man of integrity, hard-working, who loves my daughter the way she deserves to be loved. I couldn't have chosen a better son-in-law, even if I tried." Finally, he looked at Tyler, who stood beside them as the best man. "Tyler, you came into our lives as a street kid and became the brother Emily always wanted, the son I didn't know I needed, and the best friend a man could have. You saved our family." When the party ended and the guests had left, Richard stayed alone in the central square for a few minutes. He looked at the plaque he had ordered to be placed there and smiled. "Thank you," he whispered to the wind. He wasn't entirely sure who he was thanking. Maybe Rebecca, his late wife, who would surely be proud of the family they had built. Maybe fate, for bringing Tyler into his path, or maybe himself for having the courage to change. When he got home, he found Emily and Marcus packing for their honeymoon, a simple trip to a countryside inn, but one that filled them with radiant happiness. "Dad," Emily hugged him, "thank you for everything. Thank you for not giving up on me when I didn't deserve it. We always deserve a second chance when we're truly willing to change." After the newlyweds left, Richard sat on the porch with Tyler, who now lived in a student house near the university. "Tyler, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That first day when you showed up in the square, did you really know where Emily was?" Tyler smiled mysteriously. "I did. She'd asked me to keep an eye on you to see if you'd come looking for her. And if I hadn't shown up, she would have come home in a few days. She never meant to stay away forever. She just wanted you to miss her." Richard laughed. "So the two of you set me up?" "We did, but it was for your own good and it worked, didn't it?" Richard looked at the house, which had become a true home over the years. Photos of all of them covered the walls, memories of barbecues with Marcus's family, Tyler's graduation certificates. It did work, it worked perfectly. That night, alone in his room, Richard wrote in his journal, a habit he'd picked up after the events in the square. "Today my daughter married the man I've learned to love as a son. Tyler is at university, living dreams that seemed impossible 2 years ago, and I am a completely different man than I was. I've learned that being a father isn't about controlling who our children love. It's about loving them enough to accept their choices and stand by them. I've learned that being rich has nothing to do with money. It's about relationships, about love, about making a difference in people's lives. And I've learned that sometimes the greatest blessing in our life comes disguised as a challenge. The day Emily disappeared was the worst of my life, but it was also the day that led me to find who I truly am. Thank you, Rebecca, wherever you are. I think I've finally become the man you always knew I could be." 3 years later, Richard stood in the same square again, this time accompanied by a group of young people from the company he had founded specifically to give opportunities to those from underprivileged communities. Thompson & Sons, which now included Marcus as partner manager and Tyler as HR coordinator, had become a benchmark for social inclusion in the state of Oregon. "Mr. Thompson," one of the young employees said, "do you think we'll have enough time to visit all the support centers today?" Richard smiled. The company now maintained 5 support centers in different neighborhoods of Portland, offering job training, counseling, and employment opportunities. "We'll do our best, Gabriela." As they walked through the central square, Richard spotted a woman sitting on a bench with a child in her lap. She seemed to be crying. "Wait here a minute," he told the group. Richard approached the woman slowly. "Excuse me, are you all right?" The woman looked up. She was young, probably around 25, and clearly struggling. "I'm just going through some problems." Richard sat on the bench beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Would you like to talk about it? Sometimes it helps to share with someone." "You wouldn't understand. You seem like a successful person." Richard smiled. "I might understand more than you think. What's your name?" "Melissa. And this is my daughter, Sophie." "Hi, Sophie." Richard waved to the child, who must have been about 2. "So, what's the trouble, Melissa?" I don't have money to buy food for her. Her father left us, and I lost my job last week." Richard felt his heart tighten. The situation reminded him of so many stories he'd heard over the years. "Melissa, do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" "For now, yes, but I don't know how long that'll last." "Do you have any job skills?" "I took a nursing assistant course, but I couldn't get an internship because I had no one to watch Sophie." Richard thought for a moment. "Melissa, if I told you I could offer you a job, a temporary place to stay, and daycare for Sophie, would you accept?" Melissa looked at him skeptically. "Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." "Because someone once did something similar for people I love, and because I believe everyone deserves a second chance." Melissa began to cry again, but this time they were tears of relief. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. Come with me. I'd like to introduce you to some people." Richard led Melissa to where his group stood. Among them was Tyler, now an 18-year-old studying business and coordinating the company's HR department. "Tyler, I'd like you to meet Melissa and her daughter, Sophie. Melissa is a nursing assistant and looking for opportunities." Tyler smiled and extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Melissa. Would you like to see our company? We're always looking for healthcare workers for our clinic." Richard watched the scene with satisfaction. The cycle continued. Tyler, who had once been helped, was now helping others. That was how it should be. That afternoon, Melissa was hired as a nursing assistant, secured a spot in the company daycare for Sophie, and was given temporary housing in the shelter the company maintained for employees in vulnerable situations. "How do you do this?" Melissa asked at the end of the day. "Do what?" "Help people like this without expecting anything in return." Richard considered the question. "Melissa, a few years ago I was a very different man. I thought a person's worth depended on the size of their bank account, until some very special people showed me I was wrong." "Who were they?" Richard pointed to Tyler, who was organizing Melissa's hiring paperwork. "That young man over there, for example. When I met him, he was living on the streets. Today, he manages a department in my company and is in college. He taught me that intelligence, kindness, and determination are priceless." "And now you help others to pay it forward?" "Not exactly. I help because I've learned that helping others is the truest way to help yourself. When we make a difference in someone's life, our own life gains more meaning." Melissa nodded, hugging her daughter. "I promise I'll make the most of this opportunity." "I know you will, and when you're stable, I hope you'll do the same for someone else in need." 6 months later, Melissa was one of the most dedicated employees at the company. She had managed to rent a small apartment and was studying nursing at a university partnered with the company. And following the example she'd been given, she began visiting shelters on weekends, offering basic health care to people experiencing homelessness. "It's amazing how one act of help multiplies," she said to Richard during one of the company's monthly meetings. "That's what I call a virtuous cycle," Richard replied. "Kindness begets kindness." That same day, Richard received a call that moved him deeply. "Hello, Dad." "Emily, how are you, sweetheart?" "I'm great. Listen, Marcus and I have some news to share." Richard felt his heart race. "What news?" "You're going to be a grandfather." Richard sat down, his legs weak. "Really? You're expecting a baby?" "We are. It's still very early, but we wanted you to be the first to know." Richard began to cry with emotion. "This is the best news in the world. When are you coming over so we can talk about everything?" "Tomorrow. And Dad?" "Yes?" "We wanted to ask you something." "Anything." "If it's a boy, we'd like to name him Tyler Richard. In honor of Tyler and you." Richard couldn't speak anymore. Tears of happiness choked his words. "Dad, are you there?" "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm so happy, so happy." That night, Richard called Tyler to share the news. "Tyler, you're going to be an uncle, and if it's a boy, he'll have your name." "Really?" Tyler was emotional. "What an honor. The honor is ours. You're as much a part of this family as any of us." "Mr. Thompson, can I say something?" "Of course. Do you remember that first day in the Central Square?" "How could I forget? I was so scared to make that proposal. I thought you'd yell at me and walk away." "Why did you take the risk?" "Because Emily was hurting so much, and she made me see that deep down you were hurting too. You loved each other but couldn't understand each other." Richard reflected on that. "You were right. I was hurting too. I just didn't know how to admit it." "And now? Do you regret anything?" Richard looked out his office window at the square where it all began. "I only regret taking so long to learn these lessons, but then again, maybe I wasn't ready to learn them before. Everything happens at the right time." "That's true. And Tyler?" "Yes?" "Thank you for everything, for saving my family, for becoming my son, for teaching me what really matters in life. Thank you for giving me a real family." The next day, Emily and Marcus arrived for dinner. The house was full of celebration. Mrs. Garcia was there too, along with the twins, who were now in college, one studying medicine, the other education. "Grandpa Richard," Emily teased. "How does that sound?" "It sounds like music," Richard replied, hugging his daughter. During dinner, Marcus stood to make an announcement. "Everyone, Emily and I have talked a lot and made a decision about the future." Everyone looked on curiously. "We've decided we want to raise our child here in Portland, close to family. And we want our child to grow up knowing your stories, understanding where we come from. And one more thing," Emily added. "We want our child to understand from an early age that family isn't just who you're born with. Family is who we choose to love and who chooses to love us back." Richard looked around the table at all the people he had learned to love as family. Tyler, who had gone from being a street kid to a human resources coordinator. Marcus, who had gone from a slum kid to a managing partner of the company. Mrs. Garcia and the twins, who had taken him into their home when he needed it most. "Do you know what's funniest of all, yeah?" Richard said. "What?" everyone asked. 4 years ago, I thought I had lost my daughter. Today, I found out I actually gained an entire family. And we gained a father, a grandfather, a boss, and a friend," Tyler said. "Cheers to the Thompson family." Emily raised her glass. "Cheers." That night, after everyone had left, Richard went for a walk in the central square. It was something he always did when he needed to think or give thanks. He sat on the same bench where he had first met Tyler and looked at the plaque he had installed, where pride met humility and love overcame prejudice. "Hello, Rebecca," he whispered, gazing at the starry sky. "I think you'd be proud to see our family today. Emily is happy, married to a wonderful man, and we're going to have a grandchild. Tyler became the son we never had. And I finally became the man you always knew I could be." A gentle breeze rustled the trees in the square, and Richard smiled. He didn't believe in mystical signs, but he liked to imagine Rebecca was there in some way. "Thank you," he continued, "for giving me Emily, for teaching me how to love, and for watching over us from wherever you are." Richard stayed in the square a few more minutes planning the future. The company was growing, creating more and more opportunities for people in vulnerable situations. Tyler was graduating and already talking about opening his own HR consulting firm. Emily had finished her psychology degree and was working with families in therapy. Everything was falling into place in a way he could never have imagined 4 years ago. When he got home, Richard found a letter under the door. It was from Melissa, the nursing assistant he had helped in the square months earlier. "Dear Mr. Thompson, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to let you know I graduated as a nurse and will start working at a hospital next month. Sophie is growing up and always asks about Uncle Richard, who helped us. But the reason for this letter is something else. Remember when you told me to help others once I was stable? Well, I started volunteering at a community daycare and met a 17-year-old girl who's pregnant and was kicked out of her home. I talked to her and offered her a temporary place to stay in my apartment. I know it's not much, but it's what I can do for now. And I'm already talking to others to get her more help. I wanted to thank you, not just for the opportunity you gave me, but for the life lesson. You taught me that receiving help isn't humiliating, it's human, and that giving help isn't charity, it's social responsibility. I hope this letter finds you happy and well. With love and eternal gratitude." Melissa and Sophie. Richard smiled as he finished the letter. The cycle kept expanding. Melissa was helping someone who would likely one day help another, and so on. He placed the letter in a special folder where he kept all the letters and photos he had received over the years from people the company had helped. It was a collection that kept growing, reminding him daily why it was worth waking up every morning. 9 months later, Richard was in the hospital holding his grandson in his arms. The baby had been born just hours earlier and was the most perfect thing he'd ever seen. "Tyler Richard Thompson Garcia," Richard whispered. "What a beautiful name you have, my grandson." Emily was in bed, tired but radiant. Marcus held her hand, overcome with emotion. And Tyler was in the corner of the room, tears in his eyes from being honored. "He's beautiful," Tyler said. "He looks just like Marcus when he was a baby," Mrs. Garcia observed. "But he has Emily's eyes," Richard added. The baby opened his eyes and looked straight at Richard. And in that moment, Richard felt a connection that went beyond words. That little being represented the future, the continuation of a family that had formed in an unlikely but genuine way. Tyler Richard, Richard said to the baby, you'll grow up in a family that learned love is stronger than prejudice. In a family that understands people matter for who they are, not what they have. And in a family that knows helping others is the best way to help yourself. The baby made a little sound as if agreeing. I think he understood, Emily laughed. I'm sure he did, Richard replied. That night back at home, Richard wrote in his journal, Today my grandson Tyler Richard was born. When I held him in my arms, I thought about everything that happened to bring us here. 5 years ago I was a lost man, full of prejudice, who almost lost the only family he had because of pride. Today I'm the grandfather of a child who will grow up in a united family, one that truly loves each other, that understands people's worth. Tyler Richard will hear the stories of how his grandfather learned to be a better person. He'll know his Uncle Tyler, who saved our family. He'll grow up knowing his father came from humble beginnings, but succeeded in life through hard work and honesty. I hope these stories make him a better person than I was. I hope he grows up understanding that loving without prejudice isn't extraordinary. It's normal. Thank you, life. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for putting such special people in my path. And thank you for letting me witness the birth of my grandson. From today on, I'm officially Grandpa Richard, and I couldn't be happier. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. Do you believe Richard made the right decisions? Was there a moment that moved you the most? Leave your honest opinion in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.